Min Canada here. You are listening to the Trademark Global on Wheels podcast hour, the place to be to learn about the latest and greatest life stories from people who are doing incredible disability advocacy work. Hello everybody, today we have the great honor of welcoming Ade Adepitan onto the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast hour. Ade was born in Lagos, Nigeria. At the age of 15 months, he contracted polio. The effects of the virus meant that Ade was unable to use his left leg and only had partial use of his right leg. Ade discovered wheelchair basketball when he was 12 after being spotted by two physiotherapists. Ade decided to play basketball professionally. His dream to play for Great Britain at the Paralympics finally came true. After 15 years, Ade was selected to compete in the Sydney 2000 Paralympics. The Sydney Paralympics got good media coverage. This helped to boost Ade's profile amongst the British public. After starring in a documentary called Hoop Dreams for a cable channel and also featuring in the world-famous PlayStation Double Life advert, as well as presenting a wildlife show on national TV, Ade Adepitan became a familiar face in the UK with his trademark cheeky grin and flowing dreadlocks. Ade continued to represent Great Britain for 5 more years after Sydney. In that time, he won a bronze and a silver medal at the 2002 and 2005 European Championships. He also captained his country to a silver medal at the 2002 World Championships in Japan. In 2004, Ade Adepitan achieved his lifelong ambition, winning a medal at the Athens Paralympics. So without further ado, let's listen in on my conversation with Ade Adepitan. So our first question for you, Ade, is what challenges do you face as a journalist with a disability that an able-bodied journalist may not, have to experience? I know you use a manual wheelchair due to having been diagnosed with polio when you were younger, and I myself was also diagnosed with having contracted polio as well, and I also use a manual wheelchair, and so I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
So I guess when it comes to journalism, broadcast journalism, and also, I make documentaries, and I'm a travel journalist. So my form of work involves a lot of traveling around the world. First of all, it was actually getting into the profession, finding a way or a route in. That was a challenge, because generally you don't see people like me or people with disabilities as travel journalists. So to try and convince bosses, heads of TV stations that I'm the man or I'm the right person for them to send across the globe to report or to make a documentary or make a film for them. And then once you're traveling around the world, I guess, look, there are the obvious obstacles. Luckily, my wheelchair folds and the wheels come apart, so it's easy to get the chair on the plane. I've crawled up the side of volcanoes, slept in the middle of rainforests, done all sorts of things that I guess people with disabilities are kind of not expected to do. But I think the biggest obstacle to overcome are people's perceptions, people's mindsets. So when able-bodied people tend to meet someone with a disability, the first thing they think about is all the things you can't do. And that's the thing that you have to overcome. You have to prove to them just because you're in a wheelchair doesn't mean you can't do the things that anybody else can do. You just do it in a different way. And so that for me has always been the biggest obstacle. It's not the barriers that the world puts in front of me. It's the perceptions and the mental barriers, or the discrimination that you will get from certain people who think, well, someone in a wheelchair or someone with a disability can't be a journalist.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that attitude, no barriers are very real. And I'm glad you encountered those well-connected people and now you're on the screen and seen by millions of people. I think that's so important, not only as someone of color, but also as someone with a physical disability and a very visible one as well. With the next question, what reasonable accommodation or adaptations had to be made for you to work, as a TV presenter, journalist?
That's a good question. For a long time, for me, there was quite a big fear to ask for, not so much for help, but to ask for adaptations to be made or changes to be made, in order to make my life easier. And one of the reasons why I had that fear is because I kind of didn't want to feel like I was a burden. So one of the first jobs I had working in a studio was as a children's TV presenter. And the studio was great, but there were little steps to get into certain sections of the studio. Some of the doorways were not quite right to get into the changing rooms or dressing rooms and stuff like that. And to move to different areas needed to be right. And for me, what I worried about was, if I made a big fuss and I said to them, oh, you need to make this accessible, you need to add ramps, or you need to do this and do that here and there, I thought, well, they would think, well, you know what, hiring someone with a disability is too complicated. Let's not hire them. Or they might think it's too expensive, and we haven't got the budget. And so I initially didn't say something. What I didn't realize is that it's everybody's human right for them to have a workplace that is accessible, that is open, and that is prepared, or that allows them to work in the best possible fashion. And so I was really surprised, but fortunately for me, one of my bosses, she also had a disability, and she made sure that the studio, when it was built, it was designed for people with disabilities. She made sure that there was ramps. She made sure the doors were wide enough. She made sure there was a lift that would take me from one section of the studio to the other section of the studio. So I was really, really fortunate in that, she was the series editor, and she had a lot of power, and she knew what rights were necessary. And so from the beginning, the studios that I've worked in have always been accessible and made accessible for me. And I think because I was always the first person with a disability to work in a lot of these studios, I created a blueprint for other studios, and gave them knowledge to prepare their studios if someone else with a disability came in to work there. So I kind of helped to open the doors. When you travel, I think it comes down to me. Fortunate to work with different wheelchair companies. I'm working with a wheelchair company at the moment called RGK, who are based in the UK. And they've given me a wheelchair called the RGK Tiga FX, which folds really small. It means no longer do I have to be on the plane and worrying whether my chair is going to arrive at the destination that I'm going to, or be stuck on the plane waiting for the cargo people to take the chair out of the hold. And usually you end up being taken off last, but now I get off first. So for me, it's about the equipment that I have. And also I was really fortunate enough to have a series editor and producer who had a disability, and she made sure that the studios that I worked in were all accessible.
Yeah, that's great. And that wheelchair sounds amazing because you're right. For most people who use wheelchairs, they're the first to get on or the last to get on, and
Mhm.
definitely the last to get off. And so
Yes.
I hope that wheelchair, is accessible to everyone. Do you know what the cost is like? Is it accessible in terms of pricing for the average person with a disability?
Um, Yeah, I was fortunate and got the company sponsored me, but the chair, I think the chair would probably be around $2,000 US dollars, maybe a little bit more. But I know there are definitely schemes in the UK which can provide funding to help people get a wheelchair that is accessible and a wheelchair that they can use for traveling. And also, I know the company RGK are very helpful, and if they know that someone has issues, just contact them and they will find a way and try and find sources for you to help you obtain the funds that you need to get those chairs. Because and also, I mean, contact me if I can find a charity or a way to help someone who really needs a chair for that to get themselves around or to travel. I will try in any way I can to help you out and direct you to the right charities, because I think it it shouldn't be to have a quality accessible chair shouldn't be a luxury. It shouldn't be something that only someone with money or people with money can afford. It's a basic human right for everybody to be able to be able to travel around freely, and having a wheelchair that gives you that kind of accessibility and that kind of freedom is super important.
Yeah, it definitely is. I know sometimes the technology is there. They have stair climbing wheelchairs and wheelchairs that stand up, but in terms of pricing, it's not necessarily
No,
obtainable by a lot of
yeah,
people.
you're right. You're right, and that is something that we need to work on, is bringing the pricing down. And the way that's going to happen is to have more companies building wheelchairs. At the moment, there's very few companies, so because there's small numbers and there's a small demand. Then the price of the wheelchairs are quite expensive, and the materials are quite expensive. But I also think knowledge, there there are millions and millions of disabled people all over the world, but many of them don't know what is available to them, the level of equipment, the level of wheelchairs that are out there. And I think it's up down to us, people like myself and yourself, Ming, and podcasts like this, to spread the word and tell people about the equipment that's available out there.
You were saying your wheelchair folds down to really small. Do you know about around what size that RGK wheelchair folds down to?
Oh, do you know what? I mean, it's actually just on the other side of this table. If you don't, I can bring it and show it to you if you want, just to because it's folded down. If you don't
Sure,
mind.
sure,
Okay,
yes.
okay. You're going to get a live demonstration here, Ming. All right. So this is this is the wheelchair. I'll put it all together with the side guards. So normally it would have wheels on, obviously. So you can see the frame.
Yeah.
Now, all I do on the front of the chair, there are these levers which I turn. So if I turn, see this lever which I'm turning,
Uh-huh.
this knob. So I turn that way, so it's open, and I do the same on the other side. And when I push the levers forward, this folds down. And then if I do the same with the side guards and at the back, obviously we're not in the most ideal space to show it, but it should give you a rough idea. So it then folds down to this size. So
Wow.
you could get that in a big bag, or you can put it in the overhead compartment of an aeroplane. And as you can see, I'm just lifting it up pretty easy. I can lift it up with one hand. It's super, super light. And it's called the RGK TGOW.
FX.
And they travel all over the world with the chairs, and they've got certain programs. And also, I think they will probably have second-hand models of chairs as well, which will be cheaper as well to get. But that chair is a really special chair for me. It's really opened up doors.
That's great. I know it saves so much time too, right? It saves at least half an hour during every ride, if not
Yeah.
an hour or more.
And you know what? The other thing that is funny is when you see the flight attendants' faces when they see you fold the chair, because initially when you tell them, oh, the chair can fit in the overhead compartment, they look at you like you're crazy, and they're like, no way, you need to put that below. And then when you start folding it and they look at it, they're like, oh, okay. It's almost like you've done some sort of magic trick.
So do you use that one for your travels then? Do you take it on?
Yeah.
Do you use it for every day, or do you just use it on to get on and off planes?
I use this when I'm traveling. I can use it every day, but I've got another chair which I use every day, which is a lot, which is this one's light, but my other one is even lighter. So, and also because this chair takes a beating, you know, for instance, I go to, in a year, I might travel when there's not a pandemic and there's not travel restrictions. On average, I would probably do about 25 to 26 countries a year. So that's a lot of traveling, and the chair takes a beating. So what I try to do is, as soon as I get it back to the UK, I try to get the chair serviced and sorted so that it's in peak condition for when I travel again. Because there's the one thing you don't want to have is to be traveling in a far country, you know, to be somewhere in Asia, South America, or Africa, and your chair breaks, you know. So I have to make sure it's serviced as soon as it comes back to the UK.
Yeah, no, you definitely have to plan ahead of time for those kinds of things. And I know that I've had malfunctions in those areas, and it's, you know, hard to. Luckily, there haven't been big malfunctions, so it was fixable for the time being. But I imagine if there was a big malfunction, it would be really hard to fix.
So what do you like? What do you like mechanically, Ming? Can you fix a puncture? Can you fix a broken caster?
I can fix casters and hair in my caster wheel. I am guilty in terms of pumping my tires and repairing tires, just because I know it's a bike tire and most people in developing countries even will be able to do it.
Yeah. You know, I think we get a little bit lazy, don't we, over in the Western countries, because we think, oh, you know what, we can just take our chair to a bike shop or anywhere and get it fixed. But I think actually one of the things I've had to try and sort of make sure I take control of is, one, keeping up my skills of maintaining my wheelchair, and two, taking toolkits with me with spares, you know, having a few Allen keys, a few spanners, a small pump, spare inner tubes. You just got to be prepared. So I have a small emergency kit that I always take with me when I'm traveling, just in case, you know, just in case. Because I was a couple of years ago, I was in Mogadishu, in Somalia, and yeah, there may be people who can fix it, but sometimes it's too dangerous to go out and find someone. So you got to do it yourself. So Ming, start pumping up your tires.
Good tip. I know. I really should. That is a basic skill that I should definitely learn. And I have those. I have a toolkit with me too. I like to have the toolkit with me in my bag, carry on in the carry on, not what's the other one called? And so
Not in the
often,
whole luggage underneath the plane. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And oftentimes they'll confiscate my tools. I do that because I don't want my luggage to get lost, and if it does, and if there's any delays, I'll have all the things I need with me still.
I tell them, right, that listen, I need these tools. These are essential tools. I say, if my chair breaks, are you going to fix it? No, you're not going to fix it. I'm going to fix it. So I need the tools. And I get the tools out and I show them, and I show them how they work. And generally, they let me take them on. Unless you've got something like a knife or a sharp implement. But Allen keys, they generally allow me to take onto the plane, and puncture repair kits as well.
Yeah, most people are generally reasonable, but there's always that stress, especially since I insist on having it put into my carry-on. Um,
Yeah.
and a lot, and some people don't, especially when they don't speak your language, they don't necessarily listen to logic.
And
And
also, um, they don't. Sometimes some people, I don't know, they can be a little bit patronizing when they see you're in a wheelchair, and they don't, and they won't listen to you properly because you're in a wheelchair. So I tend to have to get a little bit direct and a little bit forceful with them, and then they kind of understand after a while. Because if you're not direct and you don't tell them exactly what you need, then they just push you around, and then you don't get what you need done.
yeah, exactly. So the next question is regarding unlearned and innate skills. Okay. So what skills have you learned on the job versus what skills did you already have innately to be a successful, natural TV presenter, journalist?
Wow, that's a really good question. Things like, well, live TV, that's a skill. When you're working in live TV, you'll work with an earpiece and you'll have a team. So you'll have an earpiece in, and they'll be telling you what's happening next. Where you're going to. Which camera to look at. So learning to take direction through an earpiece and being able to speak and communicate to the camera without people realizing that you're getting instructions in your earpiece. That can be sometimes disconcerting. The first time I had it, having a voice in your ear is like, oh, whoa, this is really, really strange, and having people, and there'll be lots of people in the gallery. So you're connected to an earpiece, and that earpiece will be connected to a gallery. In that gallery, there'll be a director, there'll be an editor, there'll be someone a producer, there'll be maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 people. There'll be the auto cue person, and you'll be hearing all of those voices with a heck of a lot of information. And so having to learn how to use maybe one side of your brain to disseminate that information and understand what is useful, and how to translate what is useful in your ear to a way that people will understand, that's friendly, that doesn't sound like it's been rehearsed on camera. That was a skill that I had to learn when it comes to live TV. Also learning to talk to time. If you're working on live TV and you need to go to the ad breaks, for instance, when I was presenting the Paralympics, I might be talking about, I don't know, Tatiana McFadden breaking the world record in the 400 meters. And then they're saying to me in my ear, in 20 seconds, we have to throw to an ad break. And after the ad break, we're going to go straight to the wheelchair basketball. And they'll say, but you've got 20 seconds to do that. So learning to summarize what's happened and then tell people what's going to happen and then throw to the ad break in certain amount of time. That's a skill that I've had to learn. The things that I've had innately, I've been fortunate, as you can see right here, is I'm a chatterbox. I can keep talking for as long as until the cows come home, as we say in the UK. So luckily, I'm good at talking. I'm a good communicator as well, and I think I'm good at empathizing and understanding people's stories and trying to translate a person's story or their journey to the general audience.
Yeah, definitely. And be able to adapt to the different personalities and situations on the ground. So what challenges did you encounter that you didn't foresee, even after you learned those skills?
When it comes to travel journalism, travel is definitely a big part of it. Learning to, well, not learning, but being able to deal with fatigue. Sometimes you go away and you'll travel to 2 or 3 different time zones. You'll be on planes for hours. You'll be in in cars for hours, and so learning to keep yourself healthy, getting enough sleep, dealing with dangerous situations, being in countries where you don't know whether what's around the corner. There could be security risks. There could be it could be a country that's at war. There's risks of being kidnapped. All of those things I didn't really think about when I embarked on becoming a travel journalist. But also, I think something that was really important is safeguarding. Often I go to countries where we're dealing with really sensitive stories. I mentioned being in Vietnam. And we will have people. Well, I've been in Vietnam to do a story on Agent Orange, and it was dealing with the impact that your interviews and your communication with the people will have on them once you leave, because that's something we take for granted. Especially when I went to Mogadishu, it was the same. We dealt with people who may necessarily, the government at the time might not agree with them, and you have to be careful that you don't put them in danger when you're out there. And you also got to be careful that there is a plan that is put in play to take care of those people, and to make sure they're safe once you've left. So yeah, it's quite complicated, when you're working in journalism and broadcast journalism. But it's a lot of fun and it's a privilege.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're not a one-man band when you go on these shows, right? It sounds like you have a group of people with you that is collaborating on the project.
Mm. Yes and no. So it depends on what type of project you're doing. So if I'm going to a project where, for instance, I did a documentary series called Unreported World. So if you go on YouTube and you type in Unreported World, Channel 4, and my name, Ade Adepitan, you'll see this series that I've done. And this was where we tried to tell stories that the mainstream journalism doesn't tell, that they forget to tell, or they don't think is popular enough to tell. So for instance, I went to Cuba and told the story of basketball players who were defecting in Cuba in order to find a way of to improve their life, and improve their sporting careers. I went to Mexico and I went undercover to report on a group of people with psychiatric with mental illness who were trying to report on human rights infringements by the Mexican government, who were taking people with schizophrenia, with bipolar, and locking them up in psychiatric institutes against their will. So those type of stories. And also, I was in Malawi making a story about people who were losing their eyesight because they couldn't afford to get a cataracts operation. And those sort of stories, because you're in countries where you have to be able to move quite quickly, and you don't want to cause a fuss. You don't want too many people to know you're there. You go in a small team. So it's usually 2 of us, a PD, which is called a producer director. So it'll be a director who can shoot with a camera and who produces as well. I will help to produce with them as well and do the sound as well as the presenting. And then we'll have a fixer, on-ground fixer, someone from that country who knows the language, who knows the infrastructure of the country, and that can get us in and out of places. And so you will travel with three people maximum, which helps. But then if you're doing a big glossy production, like I did something called The World's Busiest Cities, which is being shown all over the world. I think the BBC USA are showing it, Netflix are showing it. We went to New York, and when we went to New York, we went with a crew of like 20 people. You know, we had like 4 cameramen, 4 sound people, and that's glossy and that's nice and chilled out. And
just to continue on to what you just said, that sounds so exciting. What is behind the scenes? What does it look like behind the scenes? I know it's different than what's on TV, obviously. Is there something there that we may not necessarily know is going on?
So TV studios can be very intimidating the first time you go into a TV studio, because there are a lot of people who go. It's a big team that goes into bringing a TV production onto air. I think things are changing now, because with the internet, everybody is now their own TV studio. You know, you're able to do this with just relatively a small amount of equipment. But if you go to, you know, BBC studios, ITV studios, I'm sure in America in NBC or what's the other one? You know, CNN, yeah, or ABC, all of these different channels. You know, in the studio, you'll find quite a few cameras. There'll be like 2, 3, maybe even 4 cameras in the studio from different angles. You'll have an auto cue person. I think you guys call it a teleprompter. So some presenters like to work with auto cue or teleprompters, where they'll have the script on the screen that they'll work from. Some people, I don't mind. I can freelance, or I can work with the auto cue or the teleprompter. So you'll have some person who's in charge of that. You'll have another person who's in charge of the counts. They'll be doing the counts, what time, how long you're on screen for when you go to ad breaks. And you'll have a studio, a floor manager who's in charge of the people, who's in charge of the crew, and he's in charge of everything, or she's in charge of everything that's on the floor. You'll have someone who's controlling the audience, the makeup people. So they can be, you know, 20, 30, 40 people behind the camera. So when you're watching it, you'll see one person, or maybe you'll see 2 or 3 people on the couch doing an interview. But behind them, there'll be like a whole team. And that's just on the floor. Then in the gallery, there might be another 10, 15 people up in the gallery who are controlling the cameras and everything like that. So it's the number of people that is needed to make a TV production work.
Wow, that's amazing. And so just to summarize, what skill sets does one have to have, whether you're working for a travel channel or doing journalism stories, or you've done your stories are very diverse. You've done an array of different topics.
One is communications. You've got to be a good communicator. And when I say good communicator, I mean not just being able to talk, but being able to explain sometimes complex situations, complex stories, and being able to break them down into a simple fashion. You know, one of someone who I see as a mentor, a guy called Eamon Matthews, who works for Quicksilver Productions, who's taught me so much when it comes to journalism. He always used to say to us, when you're making a show, no matter how complex it is, no matter who it's for, if it's a documentary that's on late night TV that's hard hitting about war zones, or if it's a story, a consumer story about someone who's been ripped off at their local supermarket, you have to imagine that when you're getting across that information, one, it's entertaining, but 2, it can be understood by every person from every walk of life, whether it's an old person who's in their 70s or a young kid who's in a young teenager, or even a young 7 or 8 or 9-year-old. And so to be able to communicate you in a universal fashion, but not patronize people, I think is really an important skill. Secondly, you have to be inquisitive. You've got to be nosy. You've just got to always want to know what is going on, to find out more. Constantly have this like, but why? But why did that happen? You know, the why is the crux, it's the essence of every story you do. You know, initially you set out the landscape by telling people how it happened, when it happened, and all of that stuff. But what really gets people is the why.
I know right before the pandemic hit, you were covering a story about climate change. And I thought that was interesting because I just started a series on um, disabilities and climate change, and how, how climate change will affect uh, people with disabilities, and how we will be hit harder than, and has already been hit harder than other groups, other minority groups. And so why do you think people with disabilities should be included in climate change, especially in light of the story that you started to do, and hopefully we'll get to finish after the pandemic?
Well, I mean, it's very simple. We're part of the human race. You know, we are part of what goes on in this planet, and you know, we should have a say in how we maintain the planet. And also, generally, when there's any sort of disaster, when there are any major problems in the world, the people who get hit the hardest are the most vulnerable. And at the moment, it's disabled people. You know, you look at the stats and on disabled people who are living in poverty around the world. More disabled people, more people with disabilities are living in poverty around the world than any other group. You know, more people with disabilities are not given access to education. And you know, if you don't have access to education, you're more likely to be abused, you're more likely to be living in poverty. And so we will be impacted by climate change. And one of the big things that climate change is going to cause is displacement of people. You know, at the moment, the third biggest source of frozen water is in the Himalayas, in the mountains, and those ice caps in the mountains are melting because of climate change, because of temperature rises. And when as they start melting, they create what's called glacial pools, huge glacial pools. So I traveled to Bhutan, and in Bhutan, they have at the bottom of the Himalayas, on the outskirts of Bhutan, up in the mountains, these glacial pools are forming at the bottom of the mountains. And these pools are massive pools of ice, which are caused by the ice coming down from the mountains and dislodging lots of debris. And they can be up to 5 kilometers long and over a kilometer deep. Now, when they melt, they create huge floods. And what the big worry is, they will flood. Sooner or later, masses of these glacial pools are going to open up and flood the whole of Bhutan, but also the whole of the Hindu Kush. So that will be most of India, that will be big parts of China, most of Sri Lanka, most of Bangladesh, big parts of that area. And it's going to affect 1 billion people. The water supply of 1 billion people will be affected by the melting of these ice caps. And what happens when these people's water supply is affected? They move. And when they move, right, it causes tension and turmoil in the countries that they move to, you know. And the people who are affected are going to be, say, people with disabilities. You know, it's harder for people with disabilities to move. They get left behind. They get seen as collateral damage. So we have to fight, and we have to be involved in changing or taking care of our planet. Otherwise, disabled people's lives are going to be damaged exponentially all over the world.
Exactly. And speaking of the, tremendous disaster and the that high volume of displacement, do you have a good have you thought of ideas for evacuation plan, for these kinds of disastrous situations? Um, you know, how can we better include people in disaster evacuation plans,
Mm.
especially as in situations that you just described and more, droughts, fires, things that we've just seen over in Australia and also
Yeah.
California in terms of fires, but also, many other kinds of disasters.
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to think of how do we prevent those disasters, you know, because it's in our hands um, to 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 stop climate change, or to slow climate change down. And you know, but what needs to happen in the next 10 years is for us to change our way of life. You know, I think by the time it gets to the evacuation and disaster plans, it is kind of too late. It's become we're already in a position where we're trying to, you know, recover from something that will become really, really difficult to stop. So I think we have to right now, you know, start eating less meat. We have to start extracting less from the planet, you know, burning less fossil fuels, trying to live in a way that is more in tune with our planet. Um, and there are solutions. There are alternatives to the way we're living at the moment. At the moment, we live a lifestyle that is too based on consumerism. And you know, the laws of physics, the laws of mathematics and human nature shows that if you keep taking, you know, you're going to deplete, and there'll be nothing left. You know, and that's what we're doing to our planet. We're constantly extracting resources from the planet, but not putting anything back. And what we got to remember, I don't know, you know, maybe I haven't got a crystal ball. I haven't been able to travel around the universe to see what is out there. But I believe what we have on this planet is the best we're going to get. I don't think anywhere else out there in the solar system is going to match what we have on our planet Earth. You know, the human life is a miracle. The things that had to happen in order for us to be alive on this planet, which has taken billions of years of evolution to happen, is incredible. And if we destroy it, I can't say I don't believe there will be anything else out there. You know, there are people who are talking about space travel and going to other planets. I think first and foremost, we need to take care of what we have here, because it's beautiful, it's amazing, and the human race is a miracle, and we have to cherish that.
Very, very passionately and well said. And so, as a last closing question, what questions do you still have? I know you're doing a story on climate change, but what questions do you have, or did you ask, for leading environmentalists in the world, on including people with disabilities in this discussion? What still needs to be addressed for people with disabilities?
Mm. Um, I think when you put the question that way, it always boils down to the question of inequality. You know, how do we strive towards ending inequality? And what people who are working, because there are so many solutions out there to help us solve the problems that are being caused by ourselves that are leading to climate change. And these solutions can kind of lead to a new way of thinking, to almost a new beginning for us and for the next generation. So we have an opportunity now to create a future where we start from scratch. And when we start from scratch, we can eradicate those mistakes that we've made from the past. So I asked these people, what are you doing that is not only going to save the planet, but is going to make sure that it includes every person with a disability? And I think it's there. They look at technology. The driverless cars could be, once we find a way of having driverless cars that are completely safe. I have friends who are visually impaired who, for them, they can't wait for driverless cars because at the moment they have no independence. They have to rely on a sighted person to get around anywhere. And if we have a driverless electric car or driverless LPG car, or that's something that uses natural, that doesn't burn fossil fuels, and that can be driverless, then that's going to help people with visual impairment. If we start making buildings that are accessible and environmentally friendly, right, then we don't have to constantly knock down buildings and rebuild them in the future. We make them future proof. For instance, my house, I've had to put a lift in my house and put ramps and stuff in my house. That means my house is future proof. And what I constantly ask the environmentalists out there is, what can we do to future proof our planet?
Yeah, exactly. And that was beautifully said. And thank you so much for coming on. I know it's afternoon in London. It's morning here in the US in Washington, D.C. And thank you so much for being so passionate, so curious, and so generous with your time.
Ming, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure. Your questions were amazing, really, really good questions, and best of luck. And sorry if I talk too much. I know I talk a lot, so I'm really looking forward to this podcast. I hope it goes well for you. And say hi to everyone out there in Washington. I know it's a bit crazy in the US at the moment, but good luck to you guys out there.
Did you like this video? If so, share with your friends and be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want even more resources, be sure to sign up for our email updates on our website, traipsingglobal.com. Keep learning new perspectives, keep being inclusive, because it will make the world a better place for you and for everyone else. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on another episode of the Traipsing Global on Wheels podcast hour.